Good evening. This is Clydo, KA1BSZ. This evening's topic is grounding. Okay, now, in my past experience over the years, this is the kind of grounds I've had. In years past, I've taken the old house I had here in town. I took a piece of copper pipe, a pipe about so big around, and I got one of these clamps. You've seen these clamps in hardware stores. They're about so big, so long. They clamp together onto the pipe. They had a set screw in the middle to put your ground wire down through and tighten it up. So I had a piece of copper pipe driven down to the ground, probably a good, say about 3 feet, anyways. 2 or 3 feet or so. Attach a number 10 wire to it and run up to your rig. Now, sometimes the soil conductivity makes a difference whether you have a good ground on. And this is what I would do. And what you can do, let's see if your ground conductivity isn't too good. If your ground isn't really moist or anything. So, what you can do, and of course, it doesn't make a difference if you use a ground rod, commercial ground rod, make your own. Anything to dissipate the energy of the ground. So, what you can do is just about foot to 10 inches away from your ground rod in a circle. Make a little trench, about so wide, probably about that deep or so, and fill it full of rock salt. And you can get rock salt at like hardware store or feed store, and just pour that rock salt in a circle around that trench and cover it up. And put a little water on the soil, because that salt will get into the soil, and make a better conductivity in the soil. Now you can also do another thing with the soil, is you can make it more conductive with powder from a copper mine. See, we live near a couple of copper mines, and I'd go up there to the old copper mine and get some copper dust from the copper mines and just get a box of it and bring it back, and I'd put it in the ground next to the ground rod. That's if you're fortunate to live near a copper mine. Rock salt works just as good. And you could also use it like a radial system, if you can't really drive a ground rod in the ground, just take a ground wire and run it along the ground somewhere, any old place. As long as you have a good ground, doesn't make a difference what kind it is. Cold water pipe, or a ground from the AC outlet or something, AC circuit breaker box or something outside. As long as it makes a good ground. And there's a funny story I want to tell you about grounding too. And here's a funny story. I don't know if you people have heard about this before, but it was published in Popular Electronics many years ago. Seems that this owner, he had his pet dog hitched out on the light pole, power utility pole, and his dog house is inside the house here. And it'll be attached to the pole or inside the house or whatever. Doesn't matter. Seemed like every time the telephone rang, the dog would ki-eye violently. He couldn't figure out what the hell, why every time the phone rang, that the dog would make a noise. Well, here's the funny part. Here's the whole part of the whole deal. The telephone lines, when they come into your house, the old system, the old landline systems, they run on 48 volts. And there's a wire that comes from the main power line, comes down, and then it attaches to your pole, goes to your house, and there's a box inside your house, and that goes inside the house, and then there's a block there with a ground wire that goes to ground. Now on the outside of the pole, there's usually a little distribution box here on the pole, and a ground wire that goes to the ground. Now every time the phone rings, there's a voltage discharging from that box. And part of that, because part of that 48 volts goes to ground to drop it down to 24 volts going into the house, into that block. So you see, when the telephone rings, some of the voltage goes right to ground. So that voltage out there on the pole was going right to ground. So why was the dog barking violently? Well, problem is, around that circumference of that ground wire, the dog was pissing on the ground all the time. Now, you know what urine has? Urine has salt in it. Even us humans, there's salt in our urine. So the salt all over the damn ground, all the grass is all moist, so it's all saturated with salt. So every time the phone rings, that voltage goes to ground and dissipates to the ground. So what was it doing to the poor dog? It was electrocuting the poor dog. And the dog would be sitting on the ground. Of course, the dog's paws aren't insulated, neither his feet, so he's getting electrocuted by this time the phone rings. So when the landlord found out about this problem, he moved the doghouse away from the pole. Now the dog doesn't bark every time the phone rings. True story, absolutely true story. Look it up, you'll find out I'm right. So anyways, on your ground systems, that's how you make a decent ground. Most cases, you don't have to do something as drastic as I did. But where I used to live, the ground was very dry. So I had to go and do something. So that's my information to you. And the other thing is, if you get a dog, don't hook him to the power pole, because you never know. So anyways, everybody have a good evening. We'll talk to you later. Be safe. Don't drink and drive, because that might be a drink. That's a felony in Vermont and New Hampshire. And we'd rather talk to you than read about you in the paper. And you all have a good evening. Bye-bye now.